Hello and welcome back to Perspectives. On today's show, we're asking a fundamental question about the absolute state of British justice. Can the government financially execute a citizen without ever having to prove a crime in a court of law? We're tracking the case of Gurpreet Singh Rehal, the British Sikh businessman arrested, held for 13 days and released without charge because the state had insufficient evidence. Yet, by utilising an extraordinary loophole, the government steps in to freeze his assets and vaporise his livelihood away. No judge, no jury, no due process. This is an administrative death sentence in our digital age, and it sets a terrifying precedent for every single one of us. I'll tell you what we can do about it. We'll also look at the global picture, from systemic UK collusion to a massive diplomatic shift taking place this week in Azerbaijan. That's great news for the Khalistan cause. Before exposing the state censorship targeting the independent Sikh cinema. Surprise, surprise, India's doing its level best to shut Sikhs up from telling the truth about India's shameful past once again. Yes, all this and more on today's show. And of course, at the end of the show, we'll take a look at loads of great comments, which have been filling up beneath the video. So thank you for that. Right, a lot to get through today. And let's get underway. This first story. This is, I've covered it before, and I no doubt will cover it again. It is an outrage in the 21st century in so-called democratic rule of law Great Britain. This is the case of Gurpreet Singh, I beg your pardon. This is really a dreadful case of Gurpreet Singh Rehal. The story hits right at the very heart of the British justice system. It hits the heart of civil liberties, the foundational rule of law here in the West. And it's not just a story about one single individual in reality, it's an alarm bell for all of us, for all citizens. Every community activist and anyone who believes that the state should not possess the arbitrary power to destroy a human life without ever having to prove a crime in a court of law. So I want to look once again forensically at the ongoing case of Gurpreet Singh Rehal. He's a British Sikh businessman from the north of England, a place called Bradford. For those who track the diaspora's business and public footprint, his name has become pretty prominent over the summer of last year, particularly when he was fronting the high-profile Punjab Warriors sports investment takeover of a football club, Morecambe Football Club. And I covered this story at the time last week. It was a good news story. Gurpreet stepped in to save a football club that was financially struggling. Now, on the surface, it was a moment of major community positivity and enterprise, saving a historic football club from financial administration. But behind the scenes, a far more sinister, chilling legal mechanism was being prepared by the executive branch of the British government. So I want to look at the timeline of what happened. In September 2025, Gurpreet was arrested by counter-terrorism police under the Terrorism Act. He was taken into custody, interrogated, and held for 13 days. Now, under the intense weight of a modern counter-terrorism investigation, his life and background were absolutely thoroughly examined. And at the end of those 13 days, he was released without charge. The Crown Prosecution Service looked at whatever information had been gathered, that forensically examined every part of his life and determined there was insufficient evidence to bring any formal criminal proceedings against him. He walked out of custody a free man, under the law, uncharged and unconvicted. And then, this happened. December the 4th, 2025, that date sets a terrifying legal precedent. Despite being cleared of criminal charges by the state's own prosecuting authorities, Her Majesty's, or rather now His Majesty's, Treasury stepped in. Utilising an administrative loophole, the government officially designated Gurpreet under the Counter-Terrorism Sanctions EU Exit Regulations 2019, specifically Regulation 16A. And all that basically means, all those big legal words mean, in an instant, the Office of Financial Sanctions Implementation, or OFSI, enacted an absolute sweeping domestic asset freeze and imposed an immediate company director disqualification. Now, the justification published on the official UK sanctions list by the Treasury, here it is, was a series of pretty severe and serious allegations, it claimed reasonable suspicion that he belonged to, recruited for and financed pro-Khalistan militant groups, including Baba Khalsa and an associated entity called Baba Akali Lehar. But here's the critical point. These massive, serious allegations have never been tested before a judge. They've never been subjected to cross-examination. No evidence has been presented to a jury. No trial has ever taken place. So how is it possible in a country that prides itself on Magna Carta and the presumption of innocence? Remember, here in the UK, you are innocent until you are proven guilty. This has been possible because financial sanctions are not treated as criminal punishments. They're classified as administrative preventative measures. So to convict someone of a crime in a public court, the prosecution must prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. But to invoke these extraordinary sanctions, these powers, the executive branch, the Treasury, and their various state entities only need to claim, quote, reasonable suspicion. Now, clearly, it was a deliberate, highly calculated legal loophole. It allows a government to bypass the judiciary entirely. By using executive powers rather than criminal law, the state can effectively circumvent, in other words, get round the entire apparatus of legal due process. They can look at a citizen, any citizen, decide they don't like their political views or their community activism, and apply effectively a financial death sentence based on secret files and unproven suspicions. Suspicions. That's it. Literally, they might think, don't like this guy, do it. So, what's happened to Gurpreet? We need to actually look at what this means for him day to day. An asset freeze, what does it actually mean in our modern, technologically driven digital society? Now, it's not just about locking up a savings account or stopping someone from buying luxury goods. If your bank accounts are frozen these days and you're hit with an absolute financial prohibition, you're effectively executed from functioning in daily life. Every single electronic door slams shut. Now, you can't use a debit card or a credit card to buy groceries for your family. You can't pay your mortgage or your rent. You can't settle a utility bill. You can't pay for insurance. You can't put fuel in your car. And the director disqualification means your livelihood is instantly vaporized. You can't run a business. You can't employ anybody. You can't trade. You're stripped of the ability to make a living. You're trapped in a digital cage where you cannot legally receive or spend a single penny or cent without applying for a highly restrictive, bureaucratic license from the Treasury. It is basically an indefinite, crushing, state-enforced isolation that devastates not just, of course, the individual, but his family, his spouse, the children, the entire immediate family, all without a single formal criminal charge ever being tested in an open court. Now, this flies directly in the face of any democratic norm. It flies in the face of expected rule of law or any international treaty. Now, under the European Convention on Human Rights, which still remains a cornerstone of domestic legal protection, this scenario actually represents a blatant, undeniable breach of Gurpreet's fundamental human rights. And specifically, it violates Article 6, the right to a fair trial. So how can a system claim to guarantee a fair trial when it replaces the trial entirely with an executive decree? It also directly violates Article 1 of Protocol 1, the protection of property, which dictates that no one shall be deprived of their possessions except in the public interest and subject to the conditions provided for by law. But by law, quote, by law must imply due process, not this, not arbitrary executive overreach. And it brings up a pretty sinister question. Just to add insult to injury, what role has the mainstream media played in this affair? So when the sanctions were announced back in December last year, sports desks and news outlets rushed to report this sensationalised headline. And of course they focused heavily on the football club angle. Now, they also published his home address in Leeds. I know the area because I was actually brought up in that very same area. And despite well-documented security concerns regarding transnational repression targeting prominent Sikh figures, they published his home address, making him an easy target. And then, once the initial shock faded, the mainstream media completely buried the more important story of this whole situation, the deeper constitutional story, the legal, or should I say lack of legal story. They refused to ask that fundamental question of how an uncharged British citizen can be financially ruined by executive overreach, by state-sanctioned suspicion. And so this is compliance. It is quiet compliance by the mainstream media. And it's a compliance that protects state overreach, and it deliberately keeps the public completely blind to the dangerous legal tools being sharpened behind closed doors and then being used against people this government, or the establishment, whatever you want to call it, thinks, not sure we like him, let's close him down. And sadly, it's handed India a propaganda coup. And they've handed it on a plate. And one wonders, was that the deliberate plan all along? It was by design, in collusion between the UK and India, under pressure, one assumes, from the Indian establishment. This is, I'm just going to quickly play you, this is some of the Godi media at the time, just to give you a flavour of the propaganda coup this gifted India. Let me get some volume up.
Gurpreet Singh Rehal, a British national who's been linked to Babbar Khalsa International and the Babbar Akali Leher for allegedly financing Khalistani extremist activities. The United Kingdom has designated him as active promoter and financer of Khalistani terrorism, with sanctions effective from December 4th this year itself. And top intel sources are also saying that this move now strengthens India's case against Khalistani terror financing networks operating from abroad, particularly from the UK. They also believe that the action exposed.
So, there you have it, from the horse's mouth, so to speak. India actually saying it has helped our interests in stamping down Khalistani terrorism. Again, you can start to see the value that this has gifted India. So again, one wonders what has been going on behind the scenes between India and the UK, how much pressure India applied to the British government. At that very time, they were trying to strike a trade deal with India. It stinks. So, this is exactly why the Sikh Activism Silence Campaign has stepped forward and why we all need to act today. They've launched an urgent call to action, and it demands the immediate mobilisation of all of us across the UK. Now, it's not a request to endorse any specific political platform or ideology. It's a simple, uncompromising defence of basic civil liberties, due process and democratic oversight. So, it's important, because if we all remain silent, if we all just sit back and just shake our heads and discuss and do nothing about this, nothing's going to change. We cannot allow a precedent like this to become essentially into hardened permanent law, to become a usual practice tool for the state. And to paraphrase a timeless warning, first they came for the activists, and we didn't speak out because we were not activists. It's a famous poem that came from the Second World War about the Jews. In other words, if we don't speak up for Gurpreet, then who's next? It could be you. If the state is allowed to wield these outrageously extraordinary powers without parliamentary scrutiny or any sort of judicial oversight or review, then absolutely no one is safe in the future. It sets a template that can be used any time to silence any dissident, any journalist, any community leader, or any ordinary citizen who dares to challenge the status quo. So here it is. There's the link, sickactivismsilence.com/contact your MP. Go along to their website. There's a big red button, contact your MP. There it is, big red button. Click on that. So the campaign has created a very simple, very easy to use email tool. And it allows you to input your postcode and instantly then contact your local Member of Parliament. So do this. Please do it immediately. Stop watching me. Now, get onto that website. Go press that red button. Fill it in. And write to your MP. Demand proper parliamentary scrutiny of Gurpreet's case. Ask them why an administrative asset freeze is being used to bypass the Crown Prosecution Service. Demand accountability for why a citizen's home address was exposed to foreign surveillance risk. And of course, ask what safeguards exist to stop this authoritarian weapon from being turned against anyone else. Don't forget, I tell you every day about India's authoritarianism and its growing authoritarianism. What hypocrisy am I doing sitting here talking about India's problems when this has happened in the UK today? So, don't hang about, don't delay, spread the word, share the link. Let your elected representatives know that the community, all of us, won't stand by and watch the rule of law be quietly dismantled. And I use this phrase, state overreach. That is a real understatement. This is, as I say, this is Orwellian. This power that the British state has used and has deliberately put into place, it has given itself. And actually, I haven't shown it here, but I think it is one of the things. There is a quote. No, it was beneath this one. I haven't copied it here. There is a lawyer and an MP who has actually endorsed this. She is what's called a KC, a King's Counsel. And she is, in other words, one of the most senior legal representatives in the UK and a Member of Parliament. She signed this off. She endorsed this, saying, it's a great step forward in combating terrorism or something. She should be ashamed of herself. She should be absolutely ashamed of herself, putting her name to something as Orwellian as this, something that completely bypasses the normal democratic rule of law. Something that, if India did this, I would be sitting here shouting from the rafters how outrageous it was and what a great example of how undemocratic India is. This is the UK. So we need to do something about this. We need to highlight the fact, tell the world about what's been going on, because the mainstream media aren't doing it. It's up to small channels like us to tell you guys about it. So spread the word. We need more people talking about this. Talk to your MP, talk to your local news channels, highlight what's happened. Because it is an absolute outrageous, I say it, just things like this leave me speechless, that in our so-called democracy, things like this can happen. Anyway, let's move on. It is, as I say, totally shocking. Right. So, Gurpreet Singh Rehal. That is a deeply alarming example of legal overreach that's happened here in the UK. Press that red button. But we've got to be clear, this doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's not, sadly, an isolated bureaucratic mistake. What we're witnessing is the continuation of a very long-standing, highly sinister trend where successive British governments have consistently bowed to aggressive pressure from India, sacrificing the fundamental rights of our own citizens on the altar of lucrative trade deals and defence pacts and what have you. Yeah, we've been here before. And we only need to look at this, for example, this list I've just shown you. It is an undeniable historical track record of UK-India state collusion. And it paints a pattern, doesn't it? I mean, we need to look at the ongoing arbitrary detention of Jagtar Singh Rehal, Jaggy. Again, a British citizen from Dumbarton in Scotland who was abducted on the streets of Punjab by plainclothes police in 2017. And despite the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention formally declaring in 2022 that his detention has no legal basis and is, quote, deeply political, consecutive British Prime Ministers and Foreign Secretaries have repeatedly refused to call for his immediate release. Why? Because the Foreign Office has continuously chosen to prioritise trade negotiations with India over the basic consular protection and human rights of a British subject left to rot in an Indian jail. And this state-level appeasement is equally visible in how the Home Office and counter-terrorism policing have systematically targeted grassroots organisers right here in the UK diaspora. I mean, we have to consider, for example, the intense, heavy-handed state apparatus deployed against organisations like Sikh Youth UK. I've seen it for myself firsthand. For years, activists have been subjected to aggressive early morning raid tactics, intrusive digital surveillance, public smears designed to paralyse their advocacy, their activism, particularly their Khalistani activism. Again, I've met some of the guys in the Midlands, in Birmingham, some of these activists. The stories they tell me to a normal white British guy who's never, fortunately for my case, never been subjected to these incidents. What they tell me, I'm ashamed, I have to say, of what this country is doing to our own citizens. And yet when these high-profile counter-terrorism investigations are actually forced into a British courtroom, they consistently collapse. Time and time again, judges have thrown these cases out because the intelligence provided to the British security services is revealed to be nothing more than politically motivated fabrications, manufactured by, we know where it's come from, the Indian intelligence services. You guys in Canada have had exactly the same problem. Indian intelligence feeding your intelligence and law enforcement agencies with so-called evidence. And Khalistani activists in Canada have been investigated and subject to the same sort of scrutiny. And over, time and time again, their cases collapse because there is no genuine, solid evidence. And the strategy is very clear. New Delhi passes corrupted, unverified dossiers to Western security agencies, whether it's CSIS, whether it's MI5 and MI6 here in the UK. And Western governments, eager to please a powerful economic partner, weaponise their own domestic laws to silence, to freeze out and intimidate Sikh dissidents. It's an active pattern of domestic intimidation, and it proves that the British establishment is fully complicit in allowing foreign authoritarian interests to dictate the boundaries of British civil liberties. In other words, we are putting a foreign nation's interests over the interests of our own citizens. And again, we should be ashamed of ourselves. So let's move on. And this is something a little bit more positive, I'm happy to say. And it actually does lead to the answer, of course, to all this. So I want to turn from those deep frustrations and anger about state collusion Two, instead, a major game-changing shift on the international political stage. Now, for decades, the Indian state has operated under a very specific, carefully constructed strategy. Their goal has basically been to contain and control the narrative of the whole Khalistan movement and Sikh sovereignty within the borders of Punjab, and to paint the global diaspora's political aspirations for Khalistan as some sort of isolated, fringe, or even extremist, terrorist aspiration. So when Western media, the mainstream media, have cooperative trade relationships or defence pacts with New Delhi, they, of course, unsurprisingly remain silent, deliberately silent. But the diaspora isn't waiting for permission anymore from London or Ottawa or Washington or wherever to be heard. No, the diaspora, I'm pleased to say, has got off its backside and has really taken the battle to the global stage through highly sophisticated, elite-level diplomatic outreach. Intelligence, in other words, tackling this intelligently. The Khalistan movement is proving that it can outsmart and outmaneuver the Indian establishment on the global stage. And it's winning. This is why I keep saying the Khalistan movement is winning. And we need to look no further than once again back in Azerbaijan. And I've reported recently about Azerbaijan. Now, what did I say? Tuesday, Wednesday, tomorrow, June the 3rd. Baku once again becomes the epicenter of an unprecedented international summit. Now, an organisation that we've talked about before is the state-backed Baku Initiative Group, BIG, B-I-G. It's hosting a landmark international conference that's titled June 1984 Events in Amritsar, Transnational Repression by India Against Ethnic Minorities in the Context of Genocide. Wow. Let me just read you that title again of this conference, international conference. June 1984, Events in Amritsar, Transnational Repression by India Against Ethnic Minorities in the Context of Genocide. Now, you've got to think about those words. They are very significant words. This is not a small community hall gathering. It's a highly organised, state-sponsored, state-supported international forum taking place in a sovereign capital. Now, influential delegations of the Sikh diaspora from all around the world, the UK, Canada, US, the Netherlands, Germany, Switzerland and Australia, are all converging on Baku. And for the very first time, they're being joined on their platform by prominent leaders of the Dalit community, human rights lawyers, heads of global think tanks, and, crucially, international law experts. And the objective is singular, calculated, and it is very powerful. It is designed, this whole conference is designed to strip India of its narrative control and subject its record of cross-border violence and transnational repression to formal international legal scrutiny. Now, this summit isn't happening in a vacuum. It represents as I keep saying, the intelligent and brilliant, let's call it, literally brilliant escalation of a coordinated months-long diplomatic offensive by the Khalistan movement. And of course, we've got to go back to March of this year, a few months ago, when the Sikh Federation International partnered with BIG, the Baku Initiative Group, at the Geneva Press Club. And that was on the sidelines of the United Nations Human Rights Council. And there they jointly published and launched a damning, forensic 58-page report titled Beyond Borders, India's Transnational Repression Against the Sikh Diaspora. And that report, researched and drafted by expert legal counsel, systematically exposed the global infrastructure of New Delhi's intelligence operations. It detailed the covert surveillance, the blackmail, the weaponisation of visa restrictions, and of course the direct ties to organised crime networks used to target dissidents abroad, Bishnoi gang, etc. Reference yesterday's show, 2 days ago's show. The Indian state was clearly so terrified of that Geneva press launch that their own state-aligned cyber apparatus, the bot farms, the IT cells, They then launched a massive, aggressive, coordinated denial of service attacks on all the servers that held this. Basically trying to take down the digital live stream of that conference as well. They did everything they could to stop the world seeing what was being said and being reported. And of course, they failed. And the truth escaped into the international arena. And what's now followed is this week's conference in Baku. And this is the direct, unyielding follow-up to that original conference and the press conference in Geneva. So what we're witnessing is an absolute masterclass in modern political lobbying. By bypassing the passive trade-driven silence of Western governments, in other words, we've given up on trying to persuade our useless governments to do anything about it because they're so obsessed with trade deals. So instead, no, let's be more intelligent in this. Let's forget our useless leaders who are so inured by dollar signs and the lucrative trade deals being proffered by India, this massive market. Now, let's forget that. They've bypassed it. And the movement is now successfully engaging sovereign nations, other sovereign nations directly, that are willing to push back against India's geopolitical posturing. And this is how you internationalise a human rights struggle. So the agenda in Baku is explicitly focused on establishing an accurate international legal assessment of Operation Blue Star, that June 1984 armed assault on the Harmandir Sahib complex. And it's utilising independent eyewitness accounts, NGO data, everything they can basically get their hands on to establish a formal record of those thousands of innocent civilians slaughtered by state forces. Not least Bindranvaliji and his followers, who held their heroic last stand. But fortunately, it goes much further than historical memory. The delegates are now actively exchanging views. They're talking to each other. And that's important because it is now constructing a unified cross-border legal defence mechanism. They're creating a synchronised apparatus, a pressure apparatus, to ensure that ongoing acts of transnational oppression, like, for example, what happened to poor Bhai Hardeep Singh Nijjar in Canada, or even the ongoing targeted financial execution of activists here in the UK, Gurpreet, they're making sure that they remain permanently fixed on the agendas of international organisations, including, of course, the United Nations. So this is the ultimate nightmare scenario for the Ministry of External Affairs back in India. They're discovering that they can no longer suppress the truth. They can't anymore control the narrative just by applying economic leverage to Western leaders, potential trade partners, or even running smear campaigns through media houses right across the world via the Gaudiya media. The Sikh diaspora has now matured into an intelligent, highly professional, and of course highly motivated and globally coordinated diplomatic force. This is the difference. This is why I keep saying over and over again, we are winning the war, because it is being fought intelligently, professionally, and now globally. So when you see reports like this, you're seeing a community that's no longer just on the defensive. It's no longer on the back foot. It's not defending itself anymore against state overreach from India. It's now taking the strategic offensive. It's now on the front foot. It's building alliances. It's utilising international law. It's projecting its voice through sovereign international forums. The movement is successfully shifting the whole argument. The narrative of 1984, the unyielding demand for self-determination, are no longer trapped in the shadows of mainstream censorship. They're now being written directly in these halls of global diplomacy. In other words, we are taking control of the narrative. India has lost control of the narrative, and the Sikh diaspora is now taking control of it where it matters on the international legal stage. So when I talk about the Khalistan movement winning the war, it is. And this is the evidence, this is the proof. Right, final story. And talk about battlegrounds. And this actually, ironic, this is a battleground that's just as equally important. The battle for hearts and minds, of course. And these battles are just as heavily contested as the international diplomatic battles. It is, of course, the battleground of, when I talk about narrative control, this is narrative control at its sharp end. This is the control of memory, historical memory, and of course art. So when an authoritarian regime realises, when it discovers the fact that it can't contain or control a political movement intellectually, when it sees its global reputation fragmenting and being trashed, as India's is, under international legal scrutiny, it invariably turns its weapons against culture. It fights dirty. It attempts to erase the stories, censor the art, silence the voices that remind the modern generation, our next important generation, of who they are and where they came from. Remember how often I talk about how important it is that our young are educated, are reminded, or at least told for the first time, about what has happened since 1947. Of course, what happened before, but primarily so they are motivated to take that battle forward into the future. They need to be reminded and told and educated about what has happened in the recent modern times. So this battle, this reality, is playing out right now in the intense high stakes controversy surrounding a new film. It's a newly released Punjabi film, Chadi Kala. Now, it was originally apparently introduced under the title Zakma To Chadi Kala Tak. I hope I pronounced that right. It's a film directed by a guy called Angus Scott, and the stars apparently are Ami Virk and Rupi Gill. I must confess I've not heard of them, but hopefully you guys will. It is basically, it's a cinematic project. It's a big project, and it's made major headlines just last month when it debuted it had its debut at the Cannes Film Festival, a very famous film festival in the south of France. And that debut paved the way for a highly anticipated global launch at the end of May. Globally, well, and I say globally, except for one place on this planet. Guess where? India, where of course this film has been blocked. Here it is. I did a quick search here in the UK. It's being shown all over the UK. And on the surface, so this film itself, on the surface, it presents a deeply human, it's an emotionally raw drama. This is very typical cinema. It's a simple nurse, a devoted mother, a content wife sees her quiet middle-class existence utterly collapse after being falsely implicated and unplaced under suspicion following a major historical incident. And there's the clue. Subjected to brutal state interrogation, severe psychological trauma, deep social stigma, she is abandoned by society and forced to seek refuge in the rural heartlands of Punjab with her children. And there, amid suffering, she transforms her pain into purpose, becoming a pillar of support for struggling families before eventually, and again this is where it starts getting really interesting, entering the political arena and winning a massive democratic mandate from the people. So, there's a whole human story there, which is what makes it interesting as a film. But of course, it's the underlying elements there that have upset India. So this film is not, as it turns out, a work of pure fiction. It's a biographical drama inspired by real historic events. And of course, the real historical struggle of Bibi Bimal Kaur Khalsa. She is the wife of Bhai Beyant Singh. And it's her navigating that terrifying post-1984 state apparatus of extrajudicial murders, arbitrary interrogations, tortures, and of course social isolation. So the political establishment in India, and of course its embedded censorship boards, are terrified of this film because it humanises the raw survival of a Sikh family. It's showing up a mirror to the devastating reality of what happened during those times in India. It shows how a victim of state terrorism can actually rise and become an uncompromising leader of a people. So, of course, the Indian state wants an absolute monopoly on the narrative. It wants to control the narrative of what happened, that history of Punjab. It doesn't want any independent piece of art to challenge that official sanitised version of events. And if they dare do it, well, you know what's going to happen. And it's happened before. It is a pattern of calculated cultural erasure. And it's a well-oiled machine. This film, and I reported on this at the time, Punjab 95, the highly anticipated biopic of Jaswant Singh Kalra. Of course, I'm sure everybody remembers who Jaswant Singh Kalra was. He was the man who forensically uncovered and documented the systematic state-enforced extrajudicial murders and illegal mass cremation of tens of thousands of Sikh men by security forces and the Punjab police during the 1980s and 1990s. And then, of course, he himself, tragically, was abducted and murdered by those same police. So when independent filmmakers tried to bring his life to the global screen, the Indian Central Board of Film Certification, the ICBFC, didn't just demand edits. They basically attempted to commit a complete and utter cultural execution. They demanded hundreds of brutal cuts that would have rendered the film meaningless. They demanded even things like changing Jaswant Singh Kalra's actual name from his own biographical film. They delayed the release of this film literally by years. And it was a classic playbook of typical Indian narrative control. They can't delete the historical fact from existence, so instead, they try to make the truth too difficult, too legally hazardous to see or hear, and too bureaucratically exhausting to display to a modern, media-saturated audience. They want to make sure that a young, global generation growing up all around the world is completely disconnected from the sacrifices of their predecessors. They want that trauma that generation of Sikhs in the Punjab to be wiped out, to be forgotten. They want the heroes to be forgotten about, to remain nameless. And of course, they want that state's unforgivable crimes to be wiped clean from the archives of global cinema. They basically want to rewrite history and erase their shameful past. And that's basically what's been happening with Indian cinema. I'm chuckling because it just reminded me of several arguments I've had recently with Hindus on social media, trying to explain to them how indoctrinated they have become, because they on all the Khalistani posts, they weighed in quite, rudely is an understatement, quite vile insults, and when you try and argue back with them, they are so indoctrinated because of things like this. They don't even know their own history because it's been kept from them. That is an authoritarian state and how it operates. It rewrites its own history. Read 1984, the Ministry of Truth, that iconic concept where essentially they rewrite history into a history that they prefer to have happened. And that is basically what India is trying to do. So ultimately, to wrap stories up today, whether it's things like freezing bank accounts of Gurpreet here in the UK, launching cyber attacks against the press rooms in Geneva, or indeed weaponising censorship boards to chop up biographical films in India, the core motivation remains exactly the same. It is the actions of a deeply insecure, defensive state apparatus attempting to suppress an elite, intelligent and globally organised movement, the Khalistan movement, that it can no longer control. It knows it's lost the narrative. It knows it's lost control of the Khalistan movement. But good news is, these films like Chadi Kala prove the strategy is failing. The fact that Chadi Kala is being watched all around the world now by loads and loads of audiences. The community is showing up. The truth is out there. The truth is being screened on a daily basis. The spirit of Chadi Kala of that unyielding, rising optimism in the face of tyranny remains entirely unbroken and stronger than ever. So there you go. Finishing on a very positive note. So on that note, let's move on to our comments column. Loads of comments to report today. It's quite an interesting one today. Start off with these from the Perspective show. Max Force. Yes, absolutely. Has a go at Mark Carney, deservedly a go at Mark Carney. And reminds us India sits 157th in the global press, free press ranks. What more can I add to that? I think that sums it up beautifully. Amrit Singh says, thank you once again for discussing Gurpreet Singh Rehal. It was. I was going to say it's my pleasure. It's not a pleasure. I wish I didn't have to sit here and talk about Gurpreet's plight. It's absolutely outrageous. On Gurpreet, I would say I will be contacting Gurpreet today. I've been in touch with the organisation who is fighting the good fight on his behalf. And they passed me across to Gurpreet, so I will be talking to Gurpreet today. So hopefully I might have a bit more inside info. Apparently he can only say so much because, of course, there's a lot of legal ongoing stuff going on. But hopefully I may have some more information maybe in tomorrow's show. I'll keep you informed anyway. Go sign that petition if you haven't done it yet. Get out there, sign that thing. Write to your MP. Kuldip Kaur, thank you, Angus. Regarding common enemies, we're all playing the same game. But this is your final bit that made me chuckle. I do love winding the Godi bots up with a narrative. Yeah, social media. And I'm guilty of it. I try to resist, but I'm guilty of getting on there. I don't wind them up deliberately. I actually try to educate. But probably as you're finding, Kuldip, it's wasted effort. You cannot unindoctrinate somebody who's so indoctrinated by the Godi media. Right, now, today's comments were rather swamped by an interesting line. This is all about I did a very interesting podcast with Dr. Grewal last Friday, and there was a lot of comments after this podcast because it clearly really hit a lot of nerves in a positive and negative way, and it really evoked quite an interesting response from all of you guys. And I'll preface all these following comments with the simple fact: I'm not a Sikh. I've not studied the Guru Granth Sahib Ji, so I'm unqualified to pass any judgment on this other than from an objective perspective. It's up to you guys to make up your own minds about the comments that are coming, because it's quite controversial. And I would say overwhelmingly the comments were very positive and very supportive of Dr. Grewal's thesis, Avatar Dhillon being one of them. And Avatar talks about the downfall of the Mughals, the coming of the British Empire. They were prophesied by Guru Nanak. And of course in the Janam Sakhis. Now, one commenter called the Juicer. Welcome to our show, the Juicer. You feature quite largely in today's comments, you might not be surprised. And you were quite vociferous, to use a big word. You were quite robust in your feelings about this. And this is where I preface with what I said today with, I'm no expert, I don't have enough knowledge about this to judge or comment, other than to air your views and not to say whether they're right or wrong. I don't know. I will leave that up to our audience to argue back appropriately. But you completely throw this out. You say, no, it's BS. The Guru Granth Sahib Ji is not about miracles or prophecies. The Sakhis are fake and written by scammers. That's quite a big statement to make. But you do follow up with different comments, and I'm going to come on to those in a moment. Amrit says, read this book, The Sovereignty of the Sikh Doctrine, authored by Dr. Jaspir Singh Ahluwalia. My Punjabi failing badly. To have a better understanding. I will try. Unfortunately, my days are so full of preparing perspectives, I struggle to read books. But I will keep an eye out for that. But anyway, for you guys in the audience as well, that's a great recommendation from Amrit. If you haven't read that book, do read that book, because clearly it is very relevant to this discussion. So thank you, Amrit, for that reference. And Jatinder Takar says, yes, they hijacked. Basically, my premise was, and Dr. Grewal's premise was that the whole concept of Dharam and the Panth itself has been hijacked by Western colonials historically and morphed into something that actually Guru Nanak Dev Ji, the first guru, didn't intend. It's basically been hijacked by the colonialists and changed into something else, whether deliberately or through an innocent ignorance. That's the big question. Arvinda Right, now here we go. This is where the debate starts. And I'm not going to go through these comments in detail because I don't need to. You guys can read them at your leisure yourselves. But ultimately, it's all about the argument that then raged between various commenters and the juicer. And as I say, I can't pass judgment. It is up to you guys. And Arvinder says, yeah, you appreciated the podcast. And the whole what's going on now is trying to decolonize the teachings that have been introduced. But of course, it's a bit of an ongoing battle. As you say, you can't lay blame. And as you said, it was probably through innocent ignorance. And of course, religious messages in all religions do get distorted over time. Even Christianity has suffered exactly the same through various translations. And that's the key word, translations. Because the juicer comes back and says, look, no. You have studied Gurmat for 20 years. So you set out your credentials. So for all I know, you could be absolutely spot on with this. You could be right. Dr. Dillon presents evidence and sources, not strawman arguments. The Punjabi and English translations of the Guru Granth Sahib Ji are not correct at all. That actually could be a very valid argument because the Bible, I know from Christianity, the Bible has been translated several times, the King James version or whatever it is. I'm not a practicing Christian, so I can't remember. But ultimately, I know that the Bible has been translated several times. And of course, in those translations, they're always translated through the lens of the time that it was translated. So in other words, the original message has been distorted. And we actually don't know. Most people have no idea really what was the very original Bible, the very first scriptures. And likewise, potentially with the Guru Granth Sahib Ji, the very original scriptures that were written by the Gurus, have they been translated correctly? True to their original concept, premise, message, whatever. And the juice is very clear in saying, no, it wasn't. They've been mistranslated over time. And the argument rages further. And Amrik comes in. And you say, no, it was being written in the highest order poetry, excellent literary qualities. And you're, again, very, very positive and very complimentary about, firstly, Dr. Grewal's podcast, but also, how Guru Nanak's message has been maintained through the centuries. But the juicer comes back again. And you actually do present a very persuasive argument. The Guru Granth Sahib Ji is written in advanced Punjabi, but not Old Ancient. And there's only one book which explains that Gurmukhi has separate syntax grammar rules to Punjabi. And you give different examples, saying, look, words can be spelt in 3 different ways, representing different singular, plural, nouns, etc. In other words, the argument, again, it's the same argument, is that, look, it is very easy to mistranslate. And in those mistranslations, the original message can be distorted or even lost completely. And you've given evidence for that. Now, unfortunately, the juicer, you sadly have been demoted on this page from, actually, I would say, reasonable arguments that I can neither say were right or wrong, but at least simply reiterate your arguments. And I have to say they made sense. I don't know if they're right or wrong. That is up to the audience. But you did sadly land yourself in critics' corner because you just went one step too far. Now, you did continue to make some sensible comments. Sikhism has been hijacked by Brahmins in the same way they took over Buddhism. Yeah, that could well be the case. Absolutely. And there's evidence to support that. I think you're right in that. But then you start venturing into interesting territory, like Khalistan, which is set up by the Indian government so they can further target Sikhs and call them terrorists. So your premise here, and I have to say I do fundamentally disagree with this, is that your premise is that the whole Khalistan movement has actually been created by the Indian state itself to give them an excuse to essentially target Sikhs. I would totally dispute that. I think that is entirely not the case. Or if it was the case originally, then it's grown arms and legs and it has become a genuinely motivated movement. But ultimately, the Khalistan movement is rooted all the way back to the Sikh Empire. The actual conceptual, psychological roots, apart from being embedded in Sikhi and that need for sovereignty, freedom, independence, whatever, it's rooted centuries before the Indian state ever existed, even before the British Empire arrived on the subcontinent. So I would throw that argument out. I say I don't agree with that argument. I respect your premise. You're right to sort of think that, but I think you're totally wrong on that, I have to say. And then you say, But then you're accusing Dr. Graywell of actually, I think you've misinterpreted what Dr. Graywell saying. You're claiming that Dr. Graywell was saying completely the opposite to what I interpreted he was saying. And he was saying that it has been hijacked effectively by colonialism. And you're saying no, even Dr. Graywell is still wedded to the old colonial version of Sikh and the Guru Granth Sahib Ji. Well, I don't know, I disagree with that. But anyway, it's the final bit that did actually make me chuckle. And this is the bit that got you in Critics' Corner, Juicer. And Bindranvali was an agent, and so is Angus. Angus, how is MI5? I did laugh when I read this. Okay, I've had all sorts of insults thrown at me, but this is a new one. Apparently, you believe I work for MI5. Now, that would be interesting if I did, and it would be fascinating if I did. And I'll even admit, I did actually apply many years ago to MI5. And when I did, I got part way through the application, and I realised, you know what? This is not me. This really is not. Firstly, I'd still had visions of being James Bond. And it very quickly became apparent to me, it's not James Bond. It is boring, administrative, bureaucratic, detailed, intelligence sifting. It's just boring. It's not me. So anyway, yeah, so I'll be completely transparent. I did once apply, it must be about 25 years ago, I don't know, a long time ago. I applied and I gave up. I thought, no. So I walked away. But that's beside the point. The point is, could I be an MI5 agent now? Could I be acting on behalf of MI5? Now, why would MI5 be pushing the Khalistan argument? Why would MI5 want to go up against India? What possible service am I providing MI5 doing what I'm doing now? I'm fascinated, genuinely, what you think I am doing. That if MI5 is the British establishment. Every day I point out how the British establishment is working in cahoots with India. So why would I, on a daily basis, go up against India and everything that India is doing about the Khalistan movement? Essentially, I'm sitting here representing the Khalistan movement, which you're accusing is an Indian creation. It's not. India does not want Khalistan. So why on earth am I sitting here on a daily basis passionately pushing the Khalistan argument? Now, Bindranvali, there is an argument, and I have seen this, that he was, I wouldn't say he was an agent, but he was a creation, arguably, of Indira Gandhi. But again, that one grew arms and legs, as it turned out. So there is a whole backstory to that one, but ultimately. But Bindranvali was somebody who was obviously passionate enough about the human rights issue, the Sikh cause, and of course the Khalistan cause ultimately, even though he didn't state it so publicly. But he literally gave the ultimate sacrifice for that. So whether he was a state creation or an agent, he still gave the ultimate sacrifice, and heroically so, for essentially the Khalistan cause. So anyway, thank you, the Juice. So that gave me an interesting chuckle on that one. And do feel free to come back and argue why you think I could be working for MI5. Maybe MI5 can get in touch, offer me a job. That'd be interesting. I don't know if they watch this show. If you guys do, give us a call. Let's have a chat. Anyway, no, I don't really mean that. Or do I? Anyway, thank you for that chuckle. And the final word on this whole subject goes to both Punjab and Mastan Singh Dhillai. Punjab actually really sums it up. And I'd say I from an objective, non-Sikh perspective, I agree with this. From what I see, the Guru's Bani is not a collection of magic spells. It's a lot more important than that. And this really comes back to the whole concept of it. Dharam is, and my understanding from Dr. Grahal's podcast, it is a way of life. It is a mindset. And from that evolves your spirituality, your faith, and combined with others, that creates the panth. And that in itself creates this bottom-up driven religion. And as you rightly say, it's all about Chardi Kala. And I think, as I say, from an objective perspective, the reason I believe Dr. Grahal's stance on this, and I understand it, is ultimately judged by the results. The results are, as Punjab points out, Chardi Kala. When a person forms an unhealthy attachment to worldly possessions, one stops being a Sikh of the Guru. and becomes a, as you said, 24K Modi bagat. And this is what people like Bindranwale ji and others, other Shaheeds have done. They've literally given their lives because of their faith, because they know it doesn't matter. My faith is strong enough that worldly goods, worldly possessions, the physical world doesn't matter. It's the faith that matters. It is my attachment to Vaheguruji. And that is manifested, as you say, on the battlefield of Chamkur, when 40 faced tens of thousands. And yeah, that is the manifestation of Sikhi from a military perspective, but it's a manifestation of the state of mind of Sikhi, where you're literally willing to give your all, you pay that ultimate sacrifice for your faith and what that faith represents, which is freedom, independence, sovereignty, standing up to oppression, standing up to tyranny. That is the backbone of Sikhi. So, anyway, you guys can make up your own minds about that. Let me know. Was the juicer right? Was he wrong? Let me know your thoughts. But the final conclusion to that whole debate, I leave to Mastan Singh Dhulai. There is only one solution. It is a free Khalistan. That's all that matters. Sana Gurpreet Singh. Both of you doing great work. Keep it up. Well, thank you for that. But I did chuckle because both of you. So I don't know if you've been watching an old show with James, but or you're seeing double or something. But anyway, it's just me. But thank you anyway. Sukha Singh. This made me laugh. Sukha Singh, thanks, Mr. Scott. And the comment that followed actually was my answer. Don't thank me. Thank God. Guru Nanak Daba Gambhir says, thanks God. You know, we're all doing God's work in whatever belief system we work in. It's really Vaheguruji that is driving everything, and certainly driving you guys to greater heights. As PCS Automation. PCS Automation, I did this because I thought I'd give you an advert. I don't know who PCS Automation is, but clearly it must be a company. Vaheguruji ka khalsa, Vaheguruji ka fateh, Angus. Absolutely. And the final words, of course, for the show go to Jaskarat Singh, Vaheguruji ka Chadi Kala, my favourite word, Chadi Kala, I love that. Khalistan Zindabad, Gurmeet and Narinder Sidhu says, Khalistan Zindabad, God bless Khalistan. Ultimately, that is the solution. That's what we are all aiming for. That is the answer to all the issues we've talked about today. Every single issue would be solved by Khalistan. So that is why we all must continue fighting the good fight. Don't forget, Talkie Witch, go sign or go press that red button on that website to write to your MP about Gurpreet Singh Rehal's plight. In the meantime, let me know your thoughts. Let me know your comments. Leave me a comment below and send me messages. Message at satellitetv.com if there's something you'd like to bring to my attention. If you see news items, many of you have been doing, thank you very much to each of you who have emailed me. Apologies if I haven't responded. I have read your email. Much appreciated. Keep them coming. Keep your emails coming. Keep your messages coming. I must wrap up the show. We're over time as usual. Thanks so much for watching. Thanks for your loyalty. Do let me know your thoughts, comments below. Message me directly. But that's it. God willing, see you tomorrow.